Superior Courthouse. All those people are gathering, hoping that this is the day we hear a verdict. But as JC just mentioned, we're not sure if that's the case at this point, because we don't know why everyone has been called back to the courthouse this afternoon. There are 7 women and 5 men inside the Norfolk County Superior Courthouse deliberating this murder retrial. Karen Reed being tried for a second time, accused in the murder of her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe.
Let's remember, we have 18 jurors. Now, of course, there are only 12 who are deliberating. But unlike the first trial where we lost a number of jurors over the course of time, here we are. It hasn't been quite 3 months since jury selection began on April 1st. But we have held on to, they have held on to all 18 jurors, so we still have 6 alternates. I throw that out in case there is any issue with a juror for any reason. We have a plethora there to keep this going, although they would have to start deliberations over again. And if we look back, I do want to mention about how this trial changed in the sense that opening statements were April 22nd, and we went for roughly 6 weeks or 7 weeks. They rested, the prosecution rested on May 29th. They only called 38 witnesses, unlike the first time around, which were almost twice as many. But the defense put on a stronger, more robust defense if you look at it simply by the number of witnesses that they called. 6 in the first, 11 this time around. As of this morning, when those jurors walked into court, they had been deliberating for 16 and a half hours. We call it day 4 because it started Friday afternoon. You want to do it by hours. We're at 16 and a half hours. That's similar to the first trial. The first trial, they received a case late on Tuesday. By Monday, it was declared a mistrial. But the question will be, Glenn, is that the last time the jury came back twice to say they were deadlocked.
That's right.
And it took what we call a Tui Rodriguez instruction from Judge Cannone, which basically stresses how important it is that you come to a conclusion, because there is no better jury than the jury they have at that moment. You cannot leave that court thinking somebody could do a better job than you can do. She stressed that on a Friday. They came back Monday and said, still can't do it.
We surrender. You know what's so interesting about this, JC, is that we've watched both of these trials. They were prosecuted and defended very differently. But it sure seemed like yesterday when we were listening to the questions, as you watch members of the O'Keefe family head to the courthouse now, they have also been invited back this afternoon into that courtroom. Although the cases were so different, the trials proceeded so differently, it seems as if yesterday the 2 juries were ending up in about the same place, where they were just really stuck on count 2. Now, of course, that's us tea leaf reading. We don't know exactly what it is that they were stuck on, but these deliberations have dragged on in a sort of chronology so similar to the first jury.
Well, think of it this way. Think of the questions that they asked. The first question is, what time are we supposed to consider OUI? 12:45, which is when the defense said or the prosecution, I think, said she had her last drink, or 5 a.m., which is when she got back in her car that morning to go look for John. So they said, that's up to you. You have all the evidence. I think where you and I have been focusing on is if we find not guilty on 2 charges, is it a hung jury on the 3rd? They also asked, does convicting guilty on a subcharge? Example, if you go to the 2nd charge, which is manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle, there is a lesser included that is just drunk driving. And I say just with asterisks around it.
That's right.
Just drunk driving in this case, considering that she is up for 2nd-degree murder, which is a life sentence. So in that respect, just DUI, they were asking, how do we do that? And that's when that new verdict slip came back to explain how you can go through the lesser included charges, which if you haven't seen the verdict slip, it is very confusing until Judge Cannone was able to come back and say, here's how you do it. Start at the top.
Decluttered it.
Decluttered.
Yeah.
Start at the top. First thing, manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor. If you think guilty, you stop, you sign the form, you hand it in. If you as a collective 12 say not guilty, then move on to the next offense, which would be involuntary manslaughter. And you do this until you get all the way down. But as soon as you find a guilty, should they, all 12 of them, then that's where they stop. They sign a verdict slip and they hand it in. That's a great shot right there that you're looking at, where you can see the sea of pink, which is across the street. Those are the people there to support Karen Reed. And again, away from the front steps of the courthouse because of the buffer zone that was put in place. Glenn, you've been talking with the juror from the first trial who did say that they could hear the chants as those came out, and those supporting either police officers or John O'Keefe, or however they want to present themselves. At times they could be, yelling back and forth at each other. All of that was sort of in the back of that deliberation room.
Yeah.
And that's been eliminated this time. And you have to be impressed that the crowd is silent. I mean, they have held to that. Alan Jackson, the defense attorney, went up to them and said, you need to quiet down. And I believe, Glenn, am I correct, that that's when the international sign for I love you came into play?
All right, we're going to go inside the courtroom now. We can see that Judge Beverly Cannone is back on the bench, and she's about to address folks in the courtroom.
All right.
Let's listen in.
I appreciate you all getting back here. During the luncheon break, I received word from a court officer that the jury had knocked on the door, indicating that they had a verdict. But before I could even summons everybody into court, shortly thereafter, they knocked again and said they didn't have a verdict. So I asked the court officer to tell them to put that verdict slip in an envelope and seal it, and to give it to us. Paul, do you have it? Thank you. I haven't seen this. It's been sealed. I'm now going to seal it in the legal sense. So this is sealed. No one will have access to it. It will be preserved and made part of this record. I'm going to ask it to be marked for identification with the word jury, Chrissy, just to keep it separate and apart from everything else. So it's marked for ID with the word jury. All right. So we do not have a verdict because, as we all know, there is no verdict until it is announced and recorded in open court. So we are still awaiting a verdict. Because it took a while to pull this together, I would ask that everybody remain in the building until the end of the day. So we'll see everybody later.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say, I can't say that we've spoken to anybody who would have predicted this precise outcome. If just to recap, at least what I heard, and then JC, perhaps you can let me know if this is what you heard as well, because
I heard it.
My ears are still having a hard time with this. There was a knock at the door in the jury room, and the jury said they have a verdict. They passed a jury slip to the court officer, and then knocked again to say, actually, we don't have a verdict. At some point, that verdict was sealed inside an envelope and given to the court. It doesn't even look like it's been opened by the court at this point. But I'm not even sure if there's precedent for saying you have a verdict and then reneging on that announcement.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, but again, you're absolutely right. They alerted the court officer they had a verdict, and before Judge Cannone, because it was during lunch recess, could even get everybody into the courtroom, she heard that they had knocked again and said, never mind, we do not have a verdict. But she took that slip anyway, put it, she said she hasn't seen it, no one's seen it, it's in a sealed envelope, it is preserved, it is part of the record now, marked as jury to keep it separate, but there has not been a verdict until it's announced and entered into court.
This is breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. Let's go to our Melanie Mendez, who's on the ground outside the Norfolk County Superior Courthouse with all of those people we can see from this shot on Sky Ranger. Melanie, I wonder, first off, if those folks have heard what we heard.
They haven't, Glenn. That's a great question. Sorry, we're having some audio issues with my IFB here, but they have not gotten word, and I'm glad you asked that, because see how quiet and calm they are? They have been that way all day long today. In fact, I want to give you a few anecdotes that kind of show exactly what we're dealing with. this is nothing like we saw in the first trial, right? When it was a party out here, people were loud. Here, if you hear even one person yell, the whole crowd kind of says, shh, quiet, you're going to get arrested. Like, the police will come. So they are being very, very careful to stay quiet. That's, as JC mentioned, why we've seen the I love you sign, the ASL sign for I love you, them doing that over and over again. Now, you will hear a reaction from this crowd as soon as word of what just happened comes down. I'm not sure what that reaction will be, but my guess is there will be a big reaction. Now, here's the thing. These crowds have been here for days at this point, right? And I've had a chance to go in there and ask people, all right, what do you think? How is this laying out? I have yet to speak to a person out there today who was not convinced that this was the day they would have a verdict. I have yet to speak to a single person. Two guys just crossing the street to get over while we were waiting for this hit, you guys, while you two were still talking, and I just yelled across to them, hey, what do you think? And they said, verdict today, obviously. And so it really just speaks to how confident this crowd is that today will be the day. I spoke to a few people who drove in from out of state because they thought they weren't going to drive in until they thought they were close to a verdict. And when they heard our reporting from yesterday, when they heard what happened yesterday, they were that convinced that they decided, all right, this is it, we're coming in, we're going to get a verdict. Now, that said, it has been very quiet both in and outside the courthouse today. As I mentioned, the crowds have been really quiet. Everyone's kind of listening, heeding the warnings from police. You can see there on the left side of your screen, that's the media waiting for any word. They kind of stand out there. They congregate at the bottom of those steps where we get Karen Reed and her attorneys as they walk out of court. The ramp you see on the further left of your screen, right there before the chopper shot loses it, but that ramp, that's where we often see the O'Keefe family going in and out, because that allows them to avoid the media at the base of the steps. And as we know, they've not been wanting to speak to the media, understandably so, and so they take that kind of side ramp just to get in and out of the courtroom unbothered by the press, which is understandable. We saw Paul O'Keefe, we saw Mrs. O'Keefe, and we saw some best friends of John O'Keefe walking into the courthouse just a few moments ago, and they all took that side ramp entrance. But this is what you see when you are standing on the courthouse steps, JC. This is the view you see across the street. These are all of the supporters waiting.
Yep, Melody,
did you want to jump in?
Yep, we see them all on their phones there, no doubt getting the information, but we have our legal expert, Michael Coyne, with us. And Michael, we need to ask you, how can this happen? How does a jury knock on the door, tell the court officer we have a verdict, he goes to pass the message to the judge, and by the time that happens, they're knocking again to say, we don't have a verdict?
Yep, it's yet another extraordinary development in what has turned out to be an extraordinary case. I mean, the fact is, this is part of the reason we have the rule that you don't have a verdict until it's announced in open court, because jurors can actually change their mind even when they're sitting in the box announcing the verdict. And it's part of the reason why we poll the jury after the verdict to make sure that they're not under pressure, that they've recognized that this, in fact, is their finding, and they all agree to it. So it's why we had some of the problems in the last time, is that you do want the jurors to be able to freely say that that, in fact, was their vote. And clearly, one of the jurors, or at least one or more of the jurors, is saying, no, you know, I don't feel right about whatever the verdict is on whatever the count is, and I want to talk about it more, or I'm not willing to change my mind. So you don't have a verdict until it's recorded in open court, free of any of that pressure that jurors would find when there's 12 people in a room and the eyes of half the country are upon them.
Michael, let's put even a finer point under this, because in the first trial, we learned afterwards that jurors said they had reached a verdict on 2 of the counts. And when the defense team learned of this, they took their fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to argue she should not be tried again because she was acquitted on 2 charges. But all of those courts seem to agree that unless it was read in open court, the verdict doesn't stand. So it is ironic that here we are again.
Exactly. But again, it's pretty indicative of how split people are with respect to whether the government has proven its charges that Miss Reed caused John O'Keefe's death or not, because a lot of people do not believe in the government's case. And what's likely happening is the same thing we see across our Commonwealth, we see in that jury box, is that they are still vigorously debating the merits of the case. And now the question is, will they be able to convince the holdouts to go along with the majority and reach the verdict on all of the counts?
If you are Alan Jackson, if you are Hank Brennan, and most importantly, if you are Karen Reed, Michael, is there anything you can imagine they are thinking or feeling at this time, this push-pull, start-stop that just happened? Can you read anything into it?
If the only thing I'd read into it, yesterday was a pretty good day for the defense, a very good day. Today, I would be a little worried if I were them, simply because it's taking an extraordinary amount of time today to be able to resolve what would have appeared to be relatively minor differences among them. And now they've announced that they have a verdict, and then moments later they've said, no, we don't. So you'd have to be worried that at least on some of the charges that the defendant has not been able to help the jury get to the point of that there is, in fact, reasonable doubt. So that would concern me as the defendant, and I'd still be concerned as the prosecution here, simply because the jury indicated in those early notes that they, if anything, are leaning more heavily to the defendant's side of the case than the Commonwealth side.
So, Michael, based on the very limited amount we learned from Judge Beverly Cannone a few moments ago, is it your expectation that at 2:35 this afternoon, the jury is back in that room and deliberating?
Yes, and the voices at some point will be more raised, and especially if it's just one or even two holdouts against the unanimous verdict, the tension will become higher than it's been previously, especially where they thought they finally got to the goal line, and then at the very last minute that was pulled back and said, no, I can't go along with that verdict. And so now, in essence, they have to start at least a portion of it over to try and get those holdouts to agree with the majority.
Well, given that it's 2:30, they usually are done around 4. They could extend it, let's say, to 4:30. I can't imagine, and let me know what you think, Michael Coyne, that we would get to the end of today without hearing from this jury one way or another. Again, whether it's a question or whether they've reached a verdict. Based on this moment in time, could you see a way where we could go the rest of the day not hearing from them, and then we're not back till Friday? Remember, tomorrow is Juneteenth, so it's a holiday.
Yeah, I actually do think, and I thought yesterday that there's a likelihood that they may report, especially now where we see that they've had this problem. They may report, well, we have, in fact, reached a verdict on 2 of the counts, but we are not able to reach a unanimous agreement with respect to the third, whichever count that happens to be. Can we record our verdict, or are we in fact hung on the one where we don't have unanimous agreement? I would not be surprised if in the next couple hours that report or / question comes in from the jury along the lines of what we saw yesterday.
So in other words, they're not going to make it hypothetical anymore. She couldn't answer it yesterday, she said, because they said if we came to a decision on 2 of the 3 charges, but this time if they say we have, then she could respond to it.
Yeah, yes, she could. She could, in fact, accept the partial verdict and still send them out on the remaining count. And again, remember, under Massachusetts law, she has to give a Tui Rodriguez instruction before she declares that the jury is, in fact, hung and we have a mistrial. So if they report back that they can't resolve one of the counts, then she has got to give them that instruction and send them back out again. And especially with Juneteenth coming up, and my guess is that the court may look at Friday as sort of a day that maybe it makes sense to give them the day off and have them come fresh on Monday. We really might be extending this until the first of the week if, in fact, they aren't able to get back to that unanimous verdict that, at least in part, they reported having.
Well, like you, Michael, I think Judge Cannone is expecting to hear from the jury one way or the other before this day is over. She instructed both teams not to go far, Typically, we'd see them leave the courthouse at around this time after having a short proceeding like the one we just saw, but that's not the case this time. Everybody is staying inside. And Michael, the question that occurs to me is the envelope we saw Judge Cannone put up there on the bench. She said it's being preserved for the record. Read in open court, what value is that piece of paper inside the envelope?
Well, because there will be challenges in all likelihood to the jury verdict at this point. We know that us lawyers are pretty litigious, and obviously we want to defend our clients' rights. So all she's doing is, out of an abundance of caution, preserving it, because you want the public to be able to have some faith and confidence in the judicial system. So let's preserve it. And if there's an issue later on that parties want to be able to have the court examine it or have appellate courts examine it, it is in fact preserved. But Massachusetts law is incredibly clear, as we all should know from the appeals with respect to the last verdict, that until that verdict is read in open court, jurors are free to change their minds. And until the verdict is then recorded in open court, it isn't a verdict at all. So especially now, this should illuminate some of that earlier discussion from last year. You want jurors to be able to vote their conscience and then hold to that and be free of that pressure. And it's clear that based on what we're looking at here, one or more jurors doesn't feel comfortable with that verdict that they thought they all reached.
If you are just joining us, we had the reconvening of all the lawyers, Karen Reed, family, and the judge back in the courtroom because there was a note from the judge, from the jury, excuse me. Let's play that moment in case you didn't hear it the first time.
I received word from a court officer that the jury had knocked on the door indicating that they had a verdict. But before I could even summons everybody into court, shortly thereafter, they knocked again and said they didn't have a verdict. Give it to us. Paul, do you have it?
So there you go, and she, here you can see her taking it. She had, it had been put into this sealed envelope. You hear her saying it. I'm going to enter it into the record. It's going to be labeled jury to keep it separate from everything else. No one has seen it, though. No one has looked at that. And I can't imagine, honestly, being Karen Reed and knowing your fate is in an envelope potentially,
oh my goodness,
feet away from you, and no one can touch it until the jury comes back again to say officially they have a verdict because they changed their mind.
I've heard Judge Cannone read that announcement from the bench twice now. I still can't believe it. I mean, I feel as if over this more than a year now that we've been covering this case, you think you've seen every dramatic twist that you can imagine, and then yet again, here is another one.
Michael, do we still have Michael Coyne with us? Michael, I wanted to just ask you, you have said so many times how unprecedented so many aspects of this. Okay, we want to interrupt because, Michael, stay right there. We now do have word that a verdict has been reached. While we wait for that to come in, once again, have you ever heard of somebody changing their mind like that at the last second once they've already submitted a slip?
Well, yes, sometimes when the jurors are polled in open court, you will see a juror say, I don't agree, I don't feel comfortable with this decision. So while this is, again, sort of unprecedented that you see it on such a high-profile trial, it isn't unusual it is unusual. It is not unheard of that you will have, when you poll a jury for the verdict, that you do find that there isn't unanimous agreement in a criminal case, or that the verdict is consistent with what the jury is telling us in a civil case.
So, Michael, in the way that this has unfolded, rare as you mentioned, not unheard of, would you expect Judge Cannone to poll these jurors once this verdict is announced?
I would expect it, and likely, usually, depends on if we get a guilty verdict. If we get a guilty verdict, you can be sure that defense counsel will ask that they be polled.
Can the prosecution, though? What if she is found not guilty?
Exactly, JC. Commonwealth may ask, especially where we know that at least one or more jurors isn't entirely comfortable with the decision of the rest of the jurors. So I would expect that there may be a that question posed to the jurors, and it should be posed separately, but you can always also collectively poll them and say, do each of you agree with this finding? And then the jurors you would look, as the trial judge, you would look to see if in fact they nod in agreement that that is in fact their findings. So it is an extraordinary development in this case.
Well, here in the last 2 or 3 minutes, we've learned a verdict has been reached in the Karen Read murder retrial. We expect the court to reconvene shortly and for the jury to be brought in. Also, you might have noticed in your picture a greater number of police officers. It's my understanding that once a verdict is reached, there is a different public safety plan that goes into effect. And we're probably seeing the beginning stages of that right now on the street right outside the Norfolk County Superior Courthouse. There are a lot of people in that area right now, JC.
It's hard to get a full concept of it simply because, once again, the buffer zone, if you watched during the first trial, there was so much noise and commotion and color and folks around the actual steps. This time, again, they have been pushed back. So when this verdict comes down, that feeling, that moment will be different than the first time, and I'll be curious to see what that moment is like if Karen Read does walk out of those steps. Melody Mendez is outside with that crowd. Melody?
Yeah, JC and Glenn, I wanted you guys to come back out here very quickly because you can see behind me. See what these cops are doing right now? You've got some Dedham police officers here. They are shutting down the street, and that is because they have just gotten word that there is, in fact, a verdict in. They do not want traffic. This is High Street and Court Street. This is right in the heart of Dedham Center. You can hear the police officer there. He is a Dedham police officer telling these cops to, hey, get through, go through the intersection. They are clearing the road. State police have used their SUVs to block the area. You can see one state SUV right there. There is one about 3 blocks further down, but this is in the heart.
Okay.
Everywhere, and now you see the gates that are going up. Those gates are going up because they are blocking off that roadway, and now it's starting to set in, it seems, with the crowd. It's starting to become clear that we do have a verdict. You can actually tell that if you heard the people cheering just a moment ago, you could tell when those barricades went up. As soon as they saw that, that was an indicator to them, because I was speaking with our reporters who are in among those folks just a moment ago, and they were saying, oh, there's a sense people are hearing that a verdict's come down. No one's quite believing it. I think this is the moment, you guys, where the crowd is finally starting to believe it, because now they're seeing police and law enforcement reacting to the word of a verdict, and if they're reacting, that gives it credibility, right? So now we're seeing they've already blocked off one lane. They're going to do their best to block off this other lane as they get the rest of these cars from 3 blocks back through the intersection. But they are being very cautious this time around. They do not want cars going back and forth through this intersection when the verdict is read. They just want to keep things very safe, obviously, trying to keep as few people in this very busy area as possible. So just to give you some perspective of what you're seeing here, you've got several local police officers, 8 or 10 of them. They are just the ones doing traffic enforcement right now. Then you have police officers from several departments across the area, all over Norfolk County. In fact, they are helping with crowd control. And then you have the state police here as well. And they are ultimately keeping that buffer zone, or what was the buffer zone, safe. They're trying to basically keep everybody behind these barricades and just keep things safe as the energy in this crowd ramps up, which I would imagine it will continue to ramp up as we get closer and closer to a verdict. We heard 10 to 20 minutes, and that was about 5 minutes ago, you guys. So it's going to be a little while, but you can certainly see that they're really starting to get things in place now that word has come down that there is a verdict. You can see them allowing, okay, here you go. Now if you see what's happening right here on your screen, on the right side of your screen, those are the barricades that they're essentially allowing some of the barricades to move forward, but it looks like they're not. It looks like folks are trying to push them a little further than they wanted to let those folks go. So you can see those people kind of being pushed back a bit. And I think, you know, for the most part, it should be mentioned that this is a far cry from what we saw last year, right? I mean, the crowds were very loud. There was a lot happening. They're trying to keep control of this situation, and it looks like they're doing a very good job given the amount of law enforcement they have out here, guys.
Yeah, there's a lot to coordinate
doing a good
outside
job
the
of it.
courthouse, clearly, Melanie. Melanie Mendez for us outside the courthouse. Let's go to NBC 10's John Maroney, who is also outside the courthouse, who can give us a slightly different vantage point of what's happening on the ground there in Dedham. John?
You're right. We're right out in front of the courthouse where they're trying to get it set up so the folks on the other side of the street, they've been here throughout the course of the trial. On the other side of the street, they're going to move these barricades into the center of the street, and then they'll allow the crowd to come up to that point. They've also started to put a line of cars in as well, police cruisers to sort of serve as blockades, and this will be in here and in place when the verdict is read. The folks, as I said, they have been outside here for a couple of days now, and they've been in that location. They've been sort of built up and standing there. They will be able to get a little closer when the verdict does come down, but at this point in time, they're still keeping them back as they get this all set up. You want to take a look down the street a little bit here. You can see some of the media that has lined up. It goes down the street, and also to the right there, you can see the SUVs. Those are the SUVs that Karen Reed and her team come in to the courthouse in and leave. At this park there, of course, they arrived here about an hour ago now, 45 minutes ago, with the whole thing inside taking place. The judge asked them to stay in place in the event that there was a verdict, and of course, there has been one. So we're waiting to have that sort of happen and for things to take place. As you can see, folks are starting to move up to the barricades now and line up and get ready for what will be quite a moment when the verdict is read inside. I'm sure we'll be able to hear it out here in terms of the reaction from the crowd, of course. So things are preparing out here. They seem to be going pretty well. State police have done a good job, not only now, but really out through the course of the trial to keep people safe, to get people in and out. They've kept the news media, as you can see, lined up here. The chasing that used to go on with Karen Reed doesn't really happen anymore. We all stand here, and they haven't been speaking anyway, so it hasn't really been that much of an issue. But it will be interesting to see what happens when this all gets resolved and there's a verdict and what happens. Glenn and JC.
John Maroney, thank you. John, you were there for the first trial, so we love having you there now for that perspective of the differences and what it will be like when what sounds like an actual verdict, not a hung trial, a hung jury, but an actual verdict will be coming down. Melody Mendez has also been monitoring the situation. And one thing to keep in mind, Melody, is that this is not a local trial anymore. I know it's taking place in a Dedham courtroom, and it's the Commonwealth that is the one that is charging Karen Reed, but there are people around the world that are watching this, and so these moments are big, and I'm sure that pressure is on the officers as well to make sure that everything is handled as you would want it to be on the world stage.
JC, you are absolutely right, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because I do think it's important to note. I've spoken to several of the police officers that are out here this morning, all of whom have said they are just trying to keep everything as civil as possible. They want this to go smoothly. They don't want folks to see, one of them, this was a direct quote from one of them, we don't want people to think that we can't handle this and see the fiasco they saw last time. So there is a very clear sense, JC, as to what you just said, that yes, the eyes are on this county, this city, this town, and specifically this courthouse right now. I've gotten to know a lot of the court officers inside this Norfolk County Superior Court over the last 8 weeks, and I have to tell you, they are all on high alert, as they have been throughout this whole trial, being so cautious and so careful as to every move they make. They are constantly watching what's happening around them. I do want to give you a little anecdote. I just had a chance to speak to some lawyers out here who were actually inside the courthouse conducting other business. They were here for civil reasons, and they were in the courthouse conducting other business when all of a sudden they said, you got to get out. They were in the middle of their case, and they said, you got to get out. We're evacuating the courtroom. They evacuated the courthouse, excuse me, not the courtroom. Got everybody out of the courthouse with the exception of, obviously, the O'Keefe family, the Reed family, the defense team, and the jurors, and the prosecutors, and they want everyone out. They want to keep this as safe and as pared down as possible inside that courthouse right now. You can see they've moved the barricades forward quite a bit to allow people to get a little bit closer. But, JC, I'm glad you did mention that because it is very clear that there is this extra law enforcement here, and everyone is just dotting their I's, crossing their T's to make sure everything is done as it should be. No
Melody?
doubt with a self-awareness of the attention it's getting. Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. I wanted to ask you,
No, it's okay.
it's very easy to see the Karen Reed supporters because they have all rallied around
Yeah.
the color pink. From your vantage point,
Yes.
do you see, I don't want to say opposing side, but do you see other messages in that crowd? Because we see the pink from above and from a distance.
Yes. You know, a few things. First of all, I have met a few people, and I will say only two, but there are a few people out here wearing shirts and holding signs of support for John O'Keefe and for the O'Keefe family. I did have a chance to sit down and talk to them. You know, how has this been for you? Do you feel the tension that there was last time? And one of the gentlemen told me specifically, no, I don't at all, because he said he feels like he's not being attacked this time, and he feels like everyone is just kind of minding their own business. The other gentleman I spoke to didn't feel the same way. I will say that. He was definitely not thrilled about the Karen Reed supporters that were in the area, but he came out here because he felt like the other side wasn't being represented. I do want to mention, too, I have been reaching out to contacts with the O'Keefe family throughout this trial, JC, for the last 8 weeks, and they obviously do not want to talk to the media. But I've been speaking with one of John O'Keefe's closest friends who didn't want to speak for the family. I've just been exchanging texts with him today. And his comments were that obviously this is, and I'm reading this from my telephone as I speak, obviously this is a stressful time. He doesn't want to speak for the family, but look, it's been 3.5 years. They're just trying to trust the judicial process and hoping that a jury is able to get to a verdict without any outside influence. And again, that person not speaking for the O'Keefe family, but just kind of giving me a perspective as to what his friends and family are going through at this point. And that's something that's been echoed, right, that we've heard his friends and family say previously. They just want justice for John, whatever that looks like, and they want it free of this outside influence. And I think that's part of the reason that the judge and law enforcement and everyone surrounding this case has been so careful to not be chanting outside the courthouse, to not be screaming outside the courthouse this time around. Because as we heard from the jurors the last time, JC, I think you and Glenn mentioned this off the top, that juror said they could hear the crowds outside. They could hear the chanting. And this time that is certainly not the case, at least as far as the chanting is concerned. We'll have to wait and speak to these jurors afterwards and find out what, if anything, they heard from inside these deliberations. But it is very clear that this time around, there's not that hoopla, right? That loud screaming that
No,
we heard
Melody,
last time.
we hear you so clearly. We can hear the cars passing. We just heard the screech of tires. That tells you everything when you think of the size of the crowd, and we can hear that kind of minutia.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard not to empathize with the sentiments that Melody was just reading, because it has been 3.5 years. And then you get to a day like today when you expect to hear a verdict, and then you hear the fact that actually the jury changed its mind and it doesn't have a verdict. And then you hear again the verdict is reached. So that's where we are right now, all sort of teetering on the edge, waiting for this to come to a close after 3.5 years. NBC 10's Malcolm Johnson is also outside the courthouse. Malcolm, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Hey, good evening, Glenn. I would say this is really organized chaos in many ways. As you just heard and you all mentioned, you were able to hear some of the things in the background as Melody was live reporting there. State police and other first responders have things under control here, no question about it. And I wouldn't say that this is a crowd that is overly frantic or excited. Many of them have a sense of calm about them and anticipation. It's emotional for many of them. If you take a look behind me here, they have set up these barricades on High Street, which is the main thoroughfare here in town. And if we look just past the barricades, you can see many of the folks with their hands in the air, waving, blowing kisses, giving the I love you sign in sign language. And then if we pan off to our left just a little bit, you can see the caravan of state police troopers that are lined up here, and obviously the media. Many media members have made their way here, not just local, but from across the country. So let's give you a sense of how people are feeling this way. If we walk over this way, again, hundreds of people here in attendance. Over this way, you have some of Karen Reed's legal team and their vehicles, their escort vehicles that are here waiting as well. I got a chance to speak with Dedham police officers. If you give us one chance, state police are telling us to get off the road here, so we're going to make our way out of the middle of the roadway. We were going to go and speak to a woman across the street. If nothing else, we can try and show her. Anthony, if we come over this way, we can show her. She's the woman in the white with the pink stripes there, and she's speaking with the Metro-elect police officer there. She's got glasses off to the right. I said, Cheryl, would it be okay if we interviewed you? And so that was our plan to do so. That being before state police told us we could not be in the roadway. You see she's got her hands folded there. We wanted to speak with Cheryl, who's also here with her sister and other family members, because I think the images that you see right now convey the emotion that so many people have here. I said, Cheryl, is it okay if we talk to you? You see she's flashing a smile now. She said, sure, it's fine. I may cry, but we're happy to talk to you. So there is this anticipation, but there is a sense of calm. I think another part of the story that we'd like to tell is I just got a chance to speak with a resident, and she said, we cannot wait for this to be over. She said, yes, we believe and stand for people who want to peacefully protest, but this is a lot. It's burdensome on our town. There are no parking spots. It's interfered with our budget. The police and fire department are utilizing all of their resources. And so I think for those reasons, while we do see people here peacefully protesting, locals are ready for this to conclude. So we'll send it back to you guys in studio and continue to give you all a feel of what things are like here out in the scene just outside of the courthouse. Things are peaceful, things are quiet as we continue to wait to get the response to that verdict.
It's such a heavy moment for supporters, whether you're looking for justice one way or another, and whatever this verdict comes in, I keep going back to Peggy O'Keefe. I keep going back to the sadness that no matter what this verdict is, John doesn't come home. They do have a civil suit, no matter what this verdict is, that they will continue with. So their fight, no matter the verdict in this, it appears like that will continue. We'll see how emotions are handled, because it has been 3.5 years. And we know this time, or we believe there's a verdict. They have said they have a verdict, but Glenn, as you pointed out, they handed in a verdict slip just an hour ago that they had a verdict and pulled it back. So our understanding is that this is now the verdict that's going to be delivered. Karen Reed waiting to hear what her fate is. 3 charges, and we'll have to hear whether or not 12 jurors came to a conclusion on those 3 charges. We are now going live to the courtroom.
Will the deliberating jurors remain standing? Defendant remain standing? All other parties may be seated.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that 12 deliberating jurors and 6 alternates are present?
Yes.
May I inquire?
Yes.
Mr. Foreman, members of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict? Yes. Thank you. May I see the papers? Mr. Foreman, have the verdicts that have been placed in this envelope and have they been in your presence ever since? Yes. Mr. Foreman, on docket number 2282CR117001, murder in the second degree, what say you? Is the defendant at the bar guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you?
Charlie.
No. Do you agree?
Yes.
Do all of you agree?
Yes.
Thank you. 002, what say you? Is the defendant at the bar not guilty or guilty?
Not guilty.
Of.
Is not guilty or guilty of that charge or any lesser included charge? Thank you. Specifically, number 5, operating under the influence of liquor by operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or greater. Correct?
Yes.
So say you, Mr. Foreman?
Guilty.
So say you all?
Yes.
003, what say you? Is the defendant at the bar leaving the scene after accident resulting in death? Is the defendant not guilty or guilty?
Not guilty.
So say you, Mr. Foreman?
Yes.
So say you all?
Yes.
Jurors, hearken your verdict as the court records it. You, upon your say the defendant on 001 is not guilty, on 002 is guilty of operating under the influence of liquor, and 003 not guilty. Thank you.
All right, jurors, everybody please be seated. Jurors, we thank you for your service. We're going to send you back. Your service is complete. I'd like to come back and talk to you for a little bit afterwards. So thank you very much.
All rise. Call me.
Defendant Karen Reed has been acquitted in the murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Karen Reed has been acquitted in the murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. However, this jury found that she is responsible, that she is guilty for one of the lesser included offenses, and that offense is operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor. Let's listen in again.
Found not guilty will be sealed by the Commissioner of Probation by the court unless you notify the Commissioner of Probation in writing within 10 days that you do not want these records sealed. To request that these records not be sealed, you may use the request not to seal form, which is posted on the trial court's website on mass.gov. I cannot accept the form here in court. You must submit it to the Commissioner of Probation at the address provided on the form. Please be aware that if the records regarding the charges which you have been found not guilty are sealed, you will be unable to access the sealed record of the not guilty dispositions or any other records regarding those charges. If you want copies of any documents regarding those charges before the records are sealed, you should request copies from the court within 10 days. Do you understand? Thank you.
All right, so we need a date for sentencing. Can we do it next week?
Okay, we would be prepared to go forward today.
Okay. Okay.
All right, they just said they're looking to set a date for sentencing. Prosecution says they are prepared to move forward today. I think the most startling part after we heard the verdict was the volume of the cheers that you could hear right
You could hear it very
inside
clearly.
the courtroom.
Very clearly, you could hear those cheers. And sentencing, as you mentioned, JC, would be the next step. It probably will happen today. We know from our own research that the offense could be punished up to 2.5 years, but that is very rare for a first offense. Probation is more likely for a first offense, so we'll have to see what the sentencing is ultimately. Looks like there are some things getting worked out inside the courtroom. Let's listen in again.
So the standard that everybody else gets on a first-time OUI?
Certainly.
Okay.
We ask that you be treated no differently, no better.
So I'm happy to do it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
1 year probation, 1 year probation on docket number 002, the lesser included offense of operating under the influence. 1 year probation. Thank you. The 24D. Thank you.
All right.
Goodbye.
So that's it. You heard she's getting what a typical first-time offender would get for OUI, which she is getting 1 year probation. We don't know if there will be a fine. That's the paperwork that has been done, but we can point out here the prosecution didn't fight for more. Judge Cannone had some latitude there. She could have given her up to 2.5 years in prison. It's uncommon, especially for a first time, but the prosecution could have asked for that, and they didn't. The fine is anywhere from $500 to $5,000, and then there's usually alcohol education programs that go along with it. But as you can see, this is a win for the defense team, in that there you see Karen crying and she's hugging her friends and her family. We saw tears in Yannetti's eyes, one of the defense attorneys. We saw defense attorney Jackson hugging the attorney Little, who is there. This is 3.5 years of emotion that is just starting to, I would assume, start to leave their bodies within the courtroom and then outside the courtroom. Again, the cheers that came down. What we'll look to Sue O'Connell for later is, if you notice, the side where John O'Keefe's family sits, the side where his supporters sit, is empty. And so how they reacted to this, we do not know. But there you can see live pictures of, there you see Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe and Karen standing right in front of them in that light blue suit. And she is allowed to leave. She is a free woman. She is on probation. She's free.
Yes, you know, she was, of course, found guilty of OUI, but this is unequivocally a win for the defense. After 2 trials, 3.5 years, 2 trials that took about 8 weeks to complete, this defendant is leaving guilty only of OUI and not the more serious charges that she was facing. We could hear the crowd outside when the verdict was read. So let's go now to Melanie Mendez, who's been outside near those crowds. Melanie, what was that moment like?
You guys, the crowds have been going wild, and it's really interesting because it goes up and down depending on who's walking out. So right now you're seeing the media walked out, and they went nuts. Our Sue O'Connell walked out. Now you see reporters from the other stations, national reporters, and they went crazy. Now walking out right now are members of Karen Read's team, walking out to this screaming. Turtle Boy, as you can imagine, when he walked out, there was an absolute uproar from the crowd. Folks on the Read team pumping their fists. We haven't seen her main legal team quite yet. And I do want to point out that we saw the O'Keefe family go in the side ramp. My guess is we will not see them coming out. My guess is they will be allowed to go out through a different point of egress. But you can hear them chanting "Free Karen Read," and they've been in and out of these chants, but it's been really interesting, you guys. This crowd is just amped. Can you hear them? Yeah, let's listen in for just a second. You guys, the only thing I can equate this to is a concert. I have to say, as soon as Turtle Boy walked out of the doors of that courthouse, this crowd went crazy. Arms flew up, and it was incredibly loud. I turned around, there's a group of attorneys that were standing on the corner of the street, and they asked me, who is that? And I said, Turtle Boy, and they said, oh, that makes sense. Of course, he is the online blogger who has been largely at the center of the reporting of this case, at least in the beginning stages, and has continued to do so. Many of the followers here point to him as the reason this case got all of the attention it did. You can see a lot of cheering, and now look, you can see them making the I love you sign, American Sign Language sign for I love you, as they all quiet down. I would anticipate we're going to see Read and her team walk out here any moment. I do want to note, though, there was a lot of crying from inside that courtroom from Karen Read herself. You can see her hands shaking as she gave attorney Elizabeth Little a hug. A really emotional moment between her and David Yannetti, an emotional moment between her and Robert Alessi. Obviously, Yannetti, the local guy, Yannetti, the local guy, Alessi having jumped in from New York to help her case. I believe the two of the interns got applause as well as they were walking out. And now I'm going to just get up on this chair so I can see. Just give me a second. I can tell you who the... Oh, now they're all right. So now they're chanting for other supporters of Karen Read who were in the courtroom with her. They've just been allowed to get back into the crowd here. You can see the court officers, too, standing at attention at the steps of the courthouse. So what happens now, guys, and we've seen this for the last 8 weeks play out. You see in the main shot on your screen right now, those officers, right behind them, right behind those glass doors are the metal detectors. And right behind those metal detectors is where the Read team will kind of stand. They congregate right there behind metal detectors. They wait until, to this point, they've been waiting until, their cars were ready and pulled up. They all kind of gather there. They get their bearings about them, and then once they all agree, then they walk out of the doors. The court officers will make a pathway for them, and they walk out. Obviously, when they walk out today, the reception will be unlike anything we've seen thus far, because thus far the supporters have been very quiet, holding up the I love you sign in ASL. I would imagine it's going to get very noisy. We're seeing people, not only the choppers overhead, but we're seeing people running in from all directions to see if they can catch Karen Read as she walks out of the courtroom right now. We're just seeing a family running up from High Street. And you can see the court officers basically waiting for that moment where she walks out. Everyone, police on high alert. The local officer who's been out here for the better part of 8 weeks with us nearly every day, he just looked at me and kind of wiped his forehead in a sigh of, all right, it's finally over. Which I think is how a lot of folks are feeling out here right now. Certainly folks who work in this courthouse. I've had a chance to talk to so many of them and get to know so many of them over the last few months. And while they understood the gravity of what was happening, they were also keenly aware of the toll it was taking, right? A lot of work was around this. And I do want to mention that I've been talking back and forth with a friend of the O'Keefe family, saying that, listen, this is not an easy moment for the family, but they are just hoping to find justice for John O'Keefe, and we cannot forget that he is at the center of all of this. A life was lost. So while we do focus on this wild reaction and the spectacle that this case has become. It's important to every once in a while just pause and remember why we are all here, and that is ultimately an innocent life was lost. And so that shouldn't be overlooked. But I do think we're going to see any moment now Karen Read and her legal team. And let's go through some of the players, guys, and feel free to interrupt me at any point if you guys want to jump back in. But her legal team, of course, we have Alan Jackson, who is that hotshot Hollywood attorney, represented Kevin Spacey. He was a prosecutor in LA for years and then became a defense attorney. And David Yannetti reached out, David Yannetti, the local Boston attorney, when he was hired by Karen Read, reached out to Karen Read herself, and David Yannetti reached out to Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson decided to take on their case. You'll see Robert Alessi. He's the gentleman with the dark black hair and the glasses. Alessi is from New York. He took on the case pro bono. You'll also see Elizabeth Little. She is from Alan Jackson's firm out in LA. They call her Liza often. You'll see her. She's dirty blonde hair with bangs. She will come out with them as well. You might see Victoria George. She was the alternate juror from the last trial who decided to help pro bono, joined the Karen Read team as well. She's been in and out. I'm not sure if she was in court today. Couldn't quite get that shot, but you will also see...
Melody, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because I think you've given us an opportunity to just tell our audience about the legal maneuvering that happened before we got into this point. JC, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the defense team's idea to add a lesser included offense of operating a vehicle under the influence of liquor. The first jury did not have this as an option to convict Karen Read on. I think the defense team saw an opportunity here and said, well, let's give a jury struggling with count 2 an off-ramp. And it seems this jury took it.
Yeah, but what does that say about what they were really struggling with? Because if I see it as a strategy. I understand that based on what you were saying and what we've heard from our legal experts saying. But it sounds also like we had to give them something. The jurors had to find her guilty of something, so we're going to put OUI on there, which by our legal team that we've spoken to is considered a win for Karen Read and her team. It is the least of all the charges. It is a 1-year probation. It is a small fine. She might have to take alcohol education classes. When you compare that to possibly manslaughter or murder in the second degree, there is no comparison.
You're absolutely right. And I think what the defense team saw was an opportunity to avoid getting hung on one of the charges. And this seems to have avoided that. We'll get more legal analysis on that later, but for now, let's go to NBC 10's Malcolm Johnson, who's also on the ground outside the courthouse. Malcolm.
Yeah, Glenn, we want to continue to give you a feeling of what it's like here outside of the courthouse. Earlier, I heard Melody compared to that of a concert. I'd say it does feel that way when you listen to the raucous applause that you get from the crowd members here. And you see the woman there who's holding and swinging the American flag back and forth. Some people have decided to climb on top of the columns of these public buildings here in town. It looks like a team has won a championship. These are scenes that you'll see after, I don't know, maybe your Boston Celtics were to have won the championship just a season ago, climbing up light poles. You know, if you come over this way, again, we think there's more than 500 people that have made their way here into the crowd. And Anthony, who's our photographer on the day, will come over here. You know, we've been talking to different people about their different emotions and how they're feeling, what it's been like, not just through the first trial, but through the second trial as well. There's a woman here, Cheryl, if you don't mind. Yes. Sorry, don't mean to scare you. You know, we saw you how emotional you were earlier. You know, you were praying. What has this process been like for you?
To know that there is some justice. There really is some justice, and to know that Karen's free. She doesn't have to go do this again. We feel bad for the O'Keefe family because no matter what, they lost a son, and why we don't understand. But now they can find out what happened to their son. So justice was served today, and thank God.
Why has this been so emotional for you and so many others?
Because this could be any one of us. We're all Karen Read. This could be any one of us. And if you didn't have the kind of funds that she had to get yourself out of this, where would we be? In jail. We would all be in jail right now. So thank God for the jury that they picked this time, that Karen had a hand in it, and that justice was served this time. And it's an OUI, but that's fine. She was drinking. She should pay for that.
And if you could introduce us to your sister here, just to talk about what it is that...
Ma'am, sir, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I am overwhelmed. Cameron is free, like we knew she going to be. Again, I do feel bad for the O'Keefes because they lost a daughter, they lost a son, but she didn't do it. She didn't do it, so you know what? God bless Karen Reed. She's free. McAlbert's, try again. Try again.
What does justice look like for the O'Keefe family through your eyes?
Justice, because their son got murdered, and they don't know who did it. Cameron's free. She didn't do it. You have all these guilty, corrupt police officers that happen to be in the building and everything. You know what I mean? So they're not going to get justice. They probably do believe Karen did it, but she didn't do it. Look, she got proved innocent. She didn't do it, and I feel bad. But you know what? She's free. Karen Reed's free. She didn't do it. Sorry.
Are there things that you would like to hear from her today in the press conference that's forthcoming?
I just want to see Karen smile. I want to see her parents smile. I just want to just live her life, be able to walk the streets and just live. You know what I mean? She didn't even get to mourn John's death. You know what I mean? Maybe now she'll be able to. And you know what I said, and I meant it, and every day, John O'Keefe said Karen Reed free himself. Amen. Free Karen Reed.
Thank you for your time. Yeah. So if we swivel over this way, we'll continue to show you what things look like here. Again, this is some of the different vehicles that have come by that are likely for Karen Reed's legal team. We have seen them enter and exit in and out of these trucks and make their way into the courthouse over the last several days and weeks, for that matter. We are still waiting for a press conference to take place here. It doesn't seem that much of anybody has left. As we continue to look at how big the crowds are here, folks are standing by. I think they are waiting to find out what is to be said in this press conference. I think after you go through something like this, if you are a supporter, you want to see it through. And so, yes, we do have a verdict here, but I think they're anticipating what it is that Karen is going to be saying and that of her legal team as well. So we'll continue to stand by here on scene, but the feelings, very much like Melody said, that of a concert or a championship had been won just outside of this courthouse where it is organized. And you see some of the barriers here that are set up, keeping people at a distance from the courthouse itself and from where we expect the press conference to take place. But we have heard chants of free Karen, Karen is free, and those singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Again, this is the scene here outside of the courthouse. We'll continue to keep an eye on things as we wait again for that press conference to take place.
Malcolm, thank you. We appreciate that. We're going to have to assume that until we see otherwise, that those of the family and friends and loved ones of John O'Keefe are not going to go out that front door to go in front of that crowd. I know I myself would not want to walk down those stairs in front of that crowd when you have to leave knowing at this point it appears that no one will be held responsible for their son, their family member, their friend's death. So that is a monumental moment that they have to process. As for Karen Reed and the defense team, I'm sure they're gathering themselves. We saw David Yannetti, one of her defense attorneys, with some tears in his eyes. But let's go to someone who was right there at the moment. We have our courtroom insider, Sue O'Connell, who can better describe what that moment was like than any of us. Sue?
Well, JC, it was a very stressful beginning of the afternoon when we were called in and told that there was a verdict slip, but then there wasn't a verdict slip, that the jury had come to a decision, but then they didn't. But then we were just asked to wait outside and they would let us know if there was going to indeed be a verdict. Then we all went in. We were asked to leave all of our bags outside the courtroom. The court officers allowed more press than usual in. The room was packed with about 10 court officers. And then the nervous anxiety and energy of the Karen Reed team and friends and family waiting. The O'Keefes had not entered the courtroom yet. There was a lot of nervous energy, a lot of hugging. Karen hugged Attorney Alessi, hugged Attorney Jackson. And then when David Yannetti walked into the courtroom before the judges here and before the jury came back, he told a joke to them and they laughed. And then Attorney Little hugged him. So all of that pent-up energy waiting to see what the verdict would be. And then, of course, it's always so weirdly anticlimactic and a little clumsy because it's not a television show. It's real life. And the foreman said sure at one point when he was asked to affirm the verdict as it was read. And it got so loud outside here, outside the courthouse on the street, which we're all seeing here, that as the verdicts were being read, we really couldn't hear them inside the courtroom. But we did know all of them came back not guilty except for the charge on the OUI. And then business as usual as what happens. The jurors leaves. The Judge Beverly Cannone asks if they'd like to set a date for the sentencing hearing. Special prosecutor Hank Brennan said, no, we can do it now. And of course, like everything else in this trial, from beginning to end, both trials, there was a sidebar. So they had a sidebar, and the sentence, again, we didn't hear it because it was so loud outside, but just basically an emergence of crazy energy. The O'Keefe family had left at some point there, and then presses rushed out of there and had to make my way across this street somehow to get over here. But as Malcolm has been reporting, folks are singing the national anthem. I've talked to a couple of folks who wanted to make sure that John O'Keefe is remembered in this. And one person stopped me as I was trying to climb the wall to get up here to say that this could turn into some political action about police oversight. So we'll see what else we have in store. JC, Glenn?
Sue, could you actually see the O'Keefe family at the vantage point you had? I know you mentioned they kind of left the courthouse quickly, and I would expect that, but could you see their reaction when the verdict was read?
No, I couldn't, Glenn. I was behind them. I did see them as they were walking out of the courtroom. But I will say that since the first question, the questions came from the jury. Coming.
Well, reflected so much like the first trial with those questions, Sue. We've been talking about that. You can understand why anyone who was there to support John O'Keefe's memory would start to feel their heart sink when those questions came in, knowing that it sounded similar, that two would be not guilty, and maybe this would once again be a hung jury, and they'd possibly have to do this again, or it would just hang out there that we don't know. When it was said that it was, because it was a little muddled, Sue, when they were trying, much like the verdict slip, where there was so much confusion on that second charge, even when announcing the verdict in court, it was a little messy in terms of they said not guilty, and then the court officer had to ask specifically, well, wait a minute, what about the lesser included? Was there anything that you sensed in that moment when they finally nailed it down to OUI? Was there a button on that moment that you could say, there it is, we're done?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely it. And I think once we finally understood the manslaughter was not guilty, which is what you're referring to. And remember, this is an opportunity for us to look at our legal system. We're just citizens trying to figure out how to fill out a verdict slip, and it was really difficult to do. Maybe we should do something about it. Just a thought. But yes, it was finally like that OUI was the final part of it. And I'll say the jurors' reactions. I mean, we have to give our great thanks to these jurors and the alternates. They look tired. They look stressed. A couple of the jurors more on the older side. Remember, this is a young jury. I don't think anybody was over 50. Two of the women on the jury who had taken a lot of notes, they looked emotional and sad. And one juror was smiling, and the others just looked completely relieved. So remember, they had a heavy burden to carry in this, and they're just citizens like you and me. Glenn and JC?
You know, we talked a little bit about this last night on Canton Confidential. If this was the result in this trial, the second of two, that there was going to potentially be some political fallout for all of this. You know, somebody had to make the decision to try this case twice, and now I think you could say they've lost them both.
Glenn, listen, there's more to this than just the trials. There have been investigations, ongoing investigations, state police investigations, and FBI investigations. There have been millions of dollars spent on in trying to recreate what happened to John O'Keefe, whether he was hit by a car or not. State funds, all of these state scientists work for the state. All of this money that was spent on this case, as it should be, as we would all want the money not to be a barrier to solve the murder or death of our loved one. But at the same time, 2 years later, we're here with a serious charge in OUI, but nowhere nowhere near a trial of this size that would be needed to come to that verdict. So, you know, my takeaway from this is, I've been saying this since the first trial, every police department in this country should be audited on a regular basis, I think, to make sure that they can adequately respond to anything that happens in our neighborhoods or cities or towns. JC and Glenn?
So I wanted to ask you, we do expect the defense team, specifically Alan Jackson, David Yannetti, to come out and speak to this crowd, and possibly Karen herself. Did you see by chance where Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan may have gone? Would we expect to hear from him today, or will there be a statement later? What would you anticipate?
I think, JC, I think he left already. I may be wrong, but I think he was behind me as I was trying to get across the street. But I imagine what we'll see, like we did last time and often at trials, is there'll be a press release sent out by District Attorney Morrissey's office that will give us more information about what they feel. But for all intents and purposes, in reality, any way you want to slice it, this case is done. The sentencing is done, and that's it. I mean, it's just a very abrupt end to such a complicated, and it was complicated till the very end, the very last day. Verdict, no verdict, and then a flub reading the verdict at the end, but it's done right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. So it was an abrupt end in the end after we've waited so long to get to this moment. But the judicial system has resolved its second murder trial against Karen Read, and it acquitted her of all the murder charges, but she was convicted on a lesser included charge of operating under the influence of liquor. All these people you see out on the street in Dedham are waiting for the defense team to emerge from the Norfolk County Superior Courthouse and address the media, address the crowd. This part is similar to what we saw last year at the end of the mistrial ruling, where they came out and they said they have no quit, that they will continue to fight. And shortly after that, we learned that the Norfolk County District Attorney was going to decide to try this case a second time. He does not have the option to try this a third time because, of course, the defendant has been acquitted.
And let's go to our Mary Marcos, who is also outside the courthouse as we await again the defense team. Karen Read has not been shy when it comes to the cameras, Mary. I would expect that we would be hearing from her later today as well.
Well, that's what everyone out here is waiting for. They want to see Karen Read walk through the doors of this courthouse, and they expect that to happen hopefully sometime soon. And while they're waiting, they're chanting. You can see them on both sides of the street. They're on the sidewalk all the way to the middle of High Street here. They're chanting, "Bev needs to go. Lock up Jen. Where is Chloe?" And they, as you guys heard earlier, they're chanting and singing the national anthem. We've heard tears, laughter, people hugging, and we have some people here to give us some reaction. We'll start with you, Bella. What is your reaction to just the result that we've heard here?
It's just justice for John, justice for Karen, justice for the Plymouth District County, or Norfolk. It's amazing. It's well deserved.
I'm so happy that we got a verdict. We still need justice for John, though, and we need to still investigate as a society, like, what is happening with the police and stuff as we go forward. But I'm happy that we're moving forward toward justice for all.
And for the John O'Keefe family.
And the people.
And Bella and Austin made a point that I heard pretty much all day from everyone we talked to. They say they're here, they're wearing pink, they're shouting "Free Karen Read," but they also want justice for John O'Keefe. They say that is a big reason why they are here, and that is not lost on any of them today. Back to you guys.
Okay, Mary Marcos outside the courthouse, along with throngs of people. I imagine some have even come to the courthouse now knowing that the verdict has been read. But we sort of saw this crowd building over the last couple of days, particularly yesterday when those 4 questions came from the jury, 3 of them. But I think it gave everyone the anticipation that today would be the day that we get a verdict from the jury. And that was indeed the case. About an hour ago, they delivered that verdict to Judge Beverly Cannone, but not without some drama, because when we resumed right after lunch, Judge Cannone came out and said, "Well, I was told we have a verdict and I invited you all here to the courthouse, but between that time, they decided they did not have a verdict." But then it was only shortly after that, JC, that the verdict was indeed read inside the courthouse.
Michael Coyne said that does happen. It's that juries can change their mind individually, collectively, they can change their mind up until the point it is entered into court, read aloud in court, and then it becomes the official verdict. John Maroney covered this trial for us the first time around, covering this trial for us the second time around. Now that we are at a verdict, John, what is it like?
Well, certainly a lot different from the first time around, JC, of course, which ended in a hung jury. People left here at that point in time not sure what to make of the situation. Of course, now we have not guilty on the major charges in this case, so much different reaction. And as you can see, the crowd out here has been building all week long. During the course of the trial, it was interesting to follow. There were not a lot of crowds out here. A lot of it had to do with the buffer zone that they set up and some of the restrictions that they put in place. But within the last week or two, we started to see those big crowds. You're looking at the front of the courthouse now, and that is where Karen Read and her team will come out at some point in time, hopefully. Presumably, they will speak to the gathered crowd and the media. There is a podium that is set up for them to speak. We expect to see Karen. I know someone mentioned some of their attorneys, David Yannetti, Alan Jackson. Those folks, of course, have been under a gag order for this trial, so they haven't had much to say about it, but may have something to say now, no doubt, about this victory for that team. You can see the group that has gathered out here. They are in pink. You want to take a walk over and see if we can ask them a couple questions, see what they think? Chris, can you manage that okay? Why don't we go on over here? These folks have been out here for a long time, and can we ask you a couple questions? Me? Yeah, sure. First of all, how long have you been out here today, and have you been coming regularly?
Yes and no.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm going to one of these.
I was out here all day today, yes.
What did you think about the decision?
Absolutely fabulous. It's about time that the Commonwealth gets it right.
Were you surprised, or did you think this was what would happen?
I actually had a really good feeling about it, but with that second or third question, whatever one, I thought it was going to get hung up on that again and do another retrial or mistrial, whatever you want to call it. I'm so excited I can't even think right now.
No, you're doing fine. Can I ask you a question as well? What do you think the difference was between this trial and the last one?
I think they told a better story. It was